All right, let's go ahead and finish up the empire, um, the Roman Empire and the Sassanid Persian Empire. What ends up happening is there's one particular Byzantine emperor who finally figures out how to defeat the Persians. And what you do is you take all your men and you invade all the way into the heartland of Persia, and you conquer the capital city. And that's what he does. And it's a knockout blow. And these two big empires who've been fighting for centuries finally are at peace because the Byzantine Empire won. The emperor's name was Heraclius, and it's the kind of the Greek way of saying Hercules. So you're probably familiar with that. It's a early Greek hero. So Heraclius wins the war. He defeats the Sassanid Persian Empire, and everybody is happy in Byzantium. You know, Christianity won a war. Isn't that weird? Okay, well, that's the backstory to the next guy. So in the story we just finished, we saw what happens when religion is wooed into an unholy alliance with a political entity. So that's the Roman Empire. In this session, we're going to be looking at just the opposite situation. Islam is a religion that captured the political power and transformed it into its own image. So in Islam, there's really no tension between religion and the state. They're seen as the same thing. Okay, so it's quite different from the story I just told you about Constantine the Great, how he kind of pulls Christianity into this situation in which it suddenly finds itself in power. Christianity is empowered by the empire to be a political, military. I'm struggling. A political power, a military power, and a social power. It's doing all of that, but that's not what Jesus taught us to do. Jesus had a very simple message, and it was quite different from what Constantine got the church to do. So in Islam, the situation is completely different. So I think it'd be helpful just to look at Islam, how it gets started. We'll look at Mohammad and his rise and some of the events that happened in the early part of Islamic history. So I promised you 5 stories this weekend. The first story was Constantine the Great, how he comes to power, how he pulls the church from its position as a peaceful religion, as a martyred religion, as a persecuted religion, I should say, into something that's imperial and powerful and coercive. And now I'm going to look at Muhammad. Our second story is Muhammad. And notice what his religion is like. And with these 2 stories, we'll have seen the first of many cycles that we're going to encounter. So Muhammad is born in 570. So that's right there. It's hard to hold my pointer straight, but 570. And this is during the time of the Byzantine-Persian Wars. He's born down in Arabia. And so, I should pull this up earlier. So he is born down here in the Arabian Peninsula. Now, does anybody know what is the Arabian Peninsula like? What's the geography of it like? Desert. Very dry desert. In fact, one of the pieces of the desert right down in here is called the empty quarter because it's so dry. So this brings us to a point. I'm used to classrooms. If you have questions, just raise your hand. I would love to hear questions. So feel free to raise your hand. That's one of the best ways to get a teacher excited is if you raise your hand. He actually realizes that his students are paying attention and it makes it interesting. So please raise your hand if you have any observations to make or questions. So Muhammad is born down in here. Now, up here we've got the Byzantine Empire right here. We've got the Persian Empire over here. You can see that this part of the world is just outside of both. Now, these Arabs up in here are already Christian and allied to the Byzantine Empire, but they get conquered pretty often by the Persians. So they're kind of bounced between empires. Well, with Heraclius charging over here and conquering the Persian Empire this is in the early part of the 600s. it leaves both of these empires kind of exhausted. They fought for a long time. Muhammad is going to do his thing down here. And so this state, with him being just outside both of these empires and those empires fighting to kind of a state of exhaustion, really sets up what happens next. Okay, so first let's talk about Muhammad. So he's born in 570. He's orphaned when he's about 6 years old. He works for a wealthy widow for a while, and then he gets married to her. Her name is Khadijah. And he's married to her. He lives in the town of Mecca, which is right here. So this is right on the trading routes. This is an important trading route. Caravans are going through there all the time. And Muhammad is working as a merchant, essentially. The widow is fairly wealthy, and so he gets her wealth. And somewhere in the early 600s, I don't have the date. I think it's around 610, if I remember right. He's about 40 years old. He has a vision that freaks him out. In fact, he doesn't know quite what to think of it. He thinks he's losing his mind, is what the sources report. But as nearly as we can tell, he goes into kind of an epileptic fit or a coma. Well, not a coma, but a trance. Some sources report that he foams at the mouth, or that he shakes, so it sounds like a seizure almost. And then words start coming out of him. And these words are purported by Muslims to be the very words that God was speaking to Muhammad, and what they did is memorize those words and wrote them down, and just the words that came out of him during these episodes are what they consider the Quran. So it's all written down in the Quran. So it's if you read the Quran, it has this really kind of disjointed feel to it because it's coming from these sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. Well, at first, Muhammad is just sure that he's losing his mind. His wife and close friend convince him, no, this is from God. And these sayings purport to be from and be God's very words to mankind to try to shape the religion into, or to shape their actions into something more ethical and more theologically correct. And so eventually, a small group around Muhammad start to convert to this new way of thinking. And they consider Muhammad to be this prophet. The big thing that he's teaching is that there's only one God. Now, the Arabs of this peninsula were polytheists. So they had many, many gods. In Mecca, there was a black rock called the Kaaba that was kind of the place where Arabs from all over the Arabian Peninsula came to worship their gods. And Muhammad started saying, that's wrong. You shouldn't be worshiping so many gods. There's only one God, and you need to start worshiping him. Well, this didn't go down so well with the leaders of Mecca, and eventually they got tired of Muhammad saying this, and they chased him out. So he left because he was forced to, and he fled to Medina. This trip from Mecca to Medina is called the Hijrah, and it's the time that this trip happens 622 in the Gregorian calendar, and that is year 0 in the Islamic calendar. So they count their time from this. They date all their time from this moment when he flees from from Mecca to Medina. Now, in Medina, he finds a little different situation. It's a bit more cosmopolitan. There are Jews living there. There are Christians living there. The Christians tend to be Christians who've been pushed out of the empire, the Roman Empire, because of heretical beliefs. So they tend to not believe in the Trinity, which is kind of important because I think Muhammad, when he's there in Medina, he's in this kind of place where there's a lot of ideas floating around, and you can sort of see the effect of those ideas on the the Quranic statements that come after his trip to Medina. So you start hearing more, condemnation really is coming out. He's in more of a position of power in Medina. He gets a bigger group around him. He's starting to condemn the other beliefs a little bit more. But he's also mentioning that the Jews and the Christians are people of the book. Because what he believes is that there have been revelations from God in the past. The first revelations came to the Israelites, and that's the book of the law, the Torah, and the prophets were revelations from God. And then there was another revelation, the Injil, which we would call the New Testament. He's saying Jesus brought that. That's a revelation from God too. But both of those earlier ones were corrupted, is what he says. It says it in the Quran. So somehow the people changed the earlier revelations of God, and his revelation is the final and perfect revelation, and it can't be changed. They don't even allow it to. If you copy it into another language, if you translate it into another language, then they do not consider it authoritative. It doesn't have the same weight that the Arabic words. So the very words of the Quran are considered authoritative. So in Medina, as his followers grow and as his power grows, you can kind of see the religion begin to shift and change and become more controlling, and it condemns more. Christians are seen as sort of not quite as good a people as Muslims are. Muslim means one who submits, so one who submits to one God. So the really big difference that Muhammad is bringing is that there can only be one God. The Trinity can't be acceptable. So if you get rid of the idea of Trinity, then Jesus, what do you do with Jesus? So Jesus is the stumbling block, just like Paul says. The divinity of Jesus is the big problem between Christians and Muslims. That's the dividing line. That's one of the great dividing lines, I should say, between Christians and Muslims, is we believe Jesus is God. Muslims say there can only be one God. Jesus is a man. They say he's a prophet. They say he'll come back a second time at the judgment, but he's a man. They say he didn't die on the cross, that God replaced him with Judas. So there's some very big differences here. Now, we Christians say he died on the cross and he's God, and if he didn't die on the cross, he didn't redeem us. So really, we're talking about very deep and profound differences between Islam and Christianity, and this is what Muhammad is teaching. It develops over this time in Medina here. And then, as his power grows, the Quranic statements become more warlike, and suddenly he's sending out raids, Muslim Arabic raids on other non-Muslim Arabs. So Medina can really sever the supply line here between Mecca and places in the north. And he uses Medina's power to really stir up this major war between Medina and Mecca. And eventually he wins that war and he conquers Mecca. He rides into Mecca. Mecca surrenders to him. It submits to his religion by and large. Many of them become Muslim. And suddenly you've got a man who's been speaking the words of God, who is now in charge of the political situation and the religious situation. So Muhammad is the leader of politics. So he's the president, he's the king, he's the emir, all of those things, and he's the preacher, he's the patriarch, he's the pope, he's the same. It's joined in one man. So let's talk about what happens. Well, first, before we talk about what comes next on the political side of things, let's first talk about let me finish what the Muslims believe. So there are 5 pillars to their belief system. They said if you're going to be Muslim, you must believe these 5 things. You must do these 5 things. One is you must regularly proclaim that there is only one God. That's the Shahada. That's the first one. And then you need to pray 5 times a day, praying toward Mecca. And that's the second one. The third pillar is you need to give alms to the poor. The fourth pillar is you need to fast during the day, during daylight hours in the holy month of Ramadan. And the fourth pillar is you must make a trip to Mecca in your lifetime once. It's called the Hajj. All right, so that's the 5 pillars. So after Muhammad dies, a crisis sets in. What do we do? How are we going to go forward? Well, they get together and they eventually decide, the small group of powerful Muslim Arabs who are in Medina there, decide to elect Abu Bakr, I think one of the first converts to Islam. It was a relative of Muhammad's. Elect him to be the successor to Muhammad. And the term successor is Khalif. I can't pronounce it. If Donovan is here, he could probably do a much better job of it. I'll just call it caliph because that's what we English speakers usually say. So that means the successor to Muhammad. So the first successor, the first caliph was Abu Bakr. And some people had a problem with this, and we'll talk about it later in just a little bit. They weren't quite sure that we can just pick somebody to become the caliph's successor. Shouldn't it be a blood relative? And the problem is Muhammad didn't have very many. He had one daughter that he really liked, it was his favorite daughter, and she had gotten married to a guy by the name of Ali. And some of these people were saying, we really should be sticking Ali in there as the caliph. Instead, they picked Abu Bakr, and that's that. But it's going to become an issue later. So Abu Bakr, he didn't rule long at all. He starts his reign in 634, and he reigns until, he did not start his reign then. He started his reign in 632, and he reigns until 634. So it's just a 2-year reign. But during his reign, he's managed to control the rest of the Arabian Peninsula. He kind of consolidates control of that. You can see Muhammad's rule extended to about there and a little bit over here. Well, Abu Bakr, it's not split out here where you can see it, but Abu Bakr basically kind of finishes the conquest of the Arabian Peninsula. So that's Abu Bakr. He dies, and in his place, Umar is put in, begins to reign. And Umar's reign saw a lot more expansion. Now, I'll tell you, the first 4 caliphs are called the Rashidun caliphs. It's called the rightly guided ones. They're kind of considered a special class of people. The Sunni Muslims consider them to be the kind of quintessential leaders. They're the right guys. You should do it like these guys do. They're the ideal leaders. Now, the Shia have a different opinion about that, and we'll get to that in just a little bit. But this Rashidun caliphate, which you can see right here, really quickly spreads. Now, notice where they're spreading. This is the Persian Empire. This is the Byzantine Empire. In very little time, these Rashidun caliphs conquer all of the Sassanid Persian Empire. Remember how tired the Persians were? Well, they couldn't do much when the Arab horsemen came pouring out of Arabia and attacking them. They pretty much crumbled. And they took the best, well, not the best half, one of the important halves of the Byzantine Empire. Now, if the Byzantine Empire was already a half of the Roman Empire, after the Muslim conquest, it's a fourth of the Roman Empire. It's really taken apart. So they get this part right here. This goes to the Muslims. So what's happening is Heraclius, this Byzantine emperor who had just conquered the Persians, he's resting in his laurels back in Constantinople. He's very happy. And 10 years, mind you, not long at all, 10 years later, he hears about this upstart group in the desert that's attacking his eastern province or southern provinces, and they're really making a mess. So he eventually leads an army out there. Heraclius, the great general, the great leader of Byzantium, leads an army out there. And at the Battle of Yarmouk, he meets an army of desert nomads and their kind of relatives and hangers-on and kind of the people they've conquered, a whole bunch of these. He meets them, and he loses a major battle. The Byzantine emperor runs away, does not get captured, but he's the greatest thing that Byzantium has produced up till now, and he's defeated. It was a pretty serious blow. With his defeat, he pretty much loses all of this part. Now, Egypt is an important part of the Byzantine Empire because that's where a lot of the wheat is growing that feeds them. So he's dealing with a very painful loss. Okay, so that battle happened under Umar. The third caliph was Uthman, and Uthman, during Uthman's time that he gathered all the people together on the Arabian Peninsula who had been classed as Quranic speakers. So these are the guys who remembered what Muhammad had said in his ecstatic utterances, and Umar gathers all these guys together, and he makes them agree, figure out who's right and who's wrong. If there was any disagreement, he got it all figured out. And then he wrote it down, he collected the written versions that didn't agree with his, and he burned them. So now the Quran is unchanged. You will hear that often from Muslims. But this is usually a part of the story they leave pretty quietly said under their breath. So they're not super interested in hearing you talk about this part. But it is part of the story. It is part of the standardization that goes on. And you see this happening in other religions as well. Okay, so that happens under Uthman. Now, Uthman, he dies in, he dies in 656. So it's at this point that a major division develops in Islam. And what's going on is those people who wanted Ali to be the caliph, they're still saying Ali should be the caliph. And we've had 3 of them, and they're very upset that Ali is not the caliph yet. And finally they get their way, and Ali is made the caliph. Now, Ali, his power base was kind of over here in the Persian Empire. He was over in here ruling at the time he became the caliph, if I'm remembering correctly. And this was where he had a lot of followers. So under his rule, a serious rebellion started over here in Syria. And in Syria, there was a governor by the name of Muawiyah. And Muawiyah was pretty sure that he should be the next caliph. And so there's this revolt that's going on, and they're fighting back and forth. And while they're fighting, Byzantine Empire over here is kind of gathering a big sigh of relief, because they have been getting a lot of attacks here in this eastern border, and they were just glad for a break. And we're going to come back and talk about some of the battles there, but that's going to kind of come more after this period. So Muawiyah is over here revolting against Ali. Ali is seen as this blood relative of Muhammad, and Muawiyah finally manages, well, I don't think Muawiyah actually had anything to do with it. He might have, but somebody, a dissident amongst Ali's ranks, managed to assassinate him. So Ali dies by an assassin's hand, and Muawiyah is set to, become the next caliph, because he's got an army in the field and he's fighting. And so Muawiyah becomes the next caliph, but there's still this group that's really unhappy about that, because Ali was the blood relative. He was the son-in-law of Muhammad. And so Ali had a son by the name of Hussein. And Hussein is seen by these people as the rightful caliph. And then Hussein leads an army against Muawiyah. And Muawiyah somehow managed to defeat him and kill him, and 72 of his relatives or something like that. And that's kind of the moment when Shia Islam splits off from Sunni Islam. So Hussein is seen as a martyr, so is Ali, by the Shia Islamic groups. They prize the bloodline of Muhammad, and they say it's a caliph in the bloodline of Muhammad that must rule Islam. And that's what makes the Shia different from the Sunni. So that's the big difference. And the Shia are mostly over in Iran, and the Sunni are mostly everywhere else that there are Muslims. So a lot more Sunni and fewer Shia. Now, we need to talk about the Umayyad Caliphate. So the Umayyad Caliphate is what we call the Muawiyah and his descendants. So there are a number of caliphs in there in his line, and they're called the Umayyads. It's a little bit of a hard term to remember, but I'll use it because you need to get some vocabulary for this stuff. So the Umayyads, if you'll look on here, you'll see the pink territory. That's all Umayyad conquest. Pretty far out over here into the Afghanistan, other stand countries in Central Asia, a little bit in here, but it doesn't show you the most dangerous situation, except for this little line right here. So this line's important. What happens is, in 717, a Umayyad caliph decides it's time to conquer Constantinople. Constantinople's been this big, important prize that has eluded them. They've tried a couple of times, but you see, they really didn't have the technical know-how to take a city like that. Now, Constantinople is a real fortress. It is not the kind of city you can just quickly take. So it looks, notice first before we go to this one, notice where we're going. So right here, here's the Mediterranean Sea, here's the Black Sea. Constantinople's in here. When we zoom in, which is what we're going to do with this one, you can see that the Black Sea's up here. Way over here is the Aegean Sea. This you can't see on the big maps. It's an inland sea. And right up here at the very peak is where Constantinople is. So the connection between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea is very, very small. You can easily see across. In fact, when we were in Constantinople or in Istanbul, we took a ferry from the European side to the Asian side for supper and then back for our sleeping accommodations. It's really a small area. So this is called the Bosporus, and these are called the Dardanelles, unless I got them backwards, which I might have. But this is where Constantinople is. Now, if you zoom in any farther, this is what it looks like. So there's this little bit of water that shoots up in here. It's called the Golden Horn. This is a protected anchorage. They would string a chain across here. We'll talk about that more in a later date. And then they built little walls along the sea side here. Not big walls. They didn't need to. And then giant land walls along here. So this is where they have to build their biggest walls because armies can bring their siege equipment up to it and attack it in a full frontal assault. Whereas it's much harder to get to the sea walls because you're going straight from the ship on up against walls. And the Byzantine fleet could hide up in here, and because of the current in the Bosphorus, and because of the fact they knew the weather patterns very well, it was very easy for them to come surging out and to attack. So, that's the situation when the Umayyad Caliph decides it's time to conquer Constantinople. So what he does is he goes and gets his very large army and sends it overland through what's now Turkey, across, well, kind of through the easy route through Turkey, up toward Constantinople from this side. And he got some friends to attack from this side. This time, once again, those Bulgars, I think it was Bulgars, or maybe it was Avars this time, I don't remember. Different groups of people would ally with them. But they got them to attack from this side at the same time that the large Muslim Arabic army is attacking from this side. And then the cherry on top was the big fleet they sent. Because they've got a big fleet. Because the Muslim controlled Levantine coast here, they managed to build quite a large fleet along here, and they sail it up over into here. So they've got a huge brand new fleet, two big armies. They're going to take Constantinople. And you know what the Christians in Constantinople are saying, right? They're back to leading processions around the wall praying for deliverance, because they see God as primarily protecting them from conquest by pagans, by people who don't believe like they do. So God is there to protect them from that. And if they live right, then God will protect them. This is right in the middle of a really intense period where they're not sure if they've been living right or not, because some of the Byzantine churchmen have been saying, you know, those icons we have in our church, those are actually idolatry. Those are idols. And we need to get rid of them. It starts a long period of tension around icons in the Byzantine church. The people who want to get rid of them are called iconoclasts. They want to smash the icons. The people who want to keep them are called iconophiles. They want to keep them. They love them. It's the Greek word for love, which you hear in Philadelphia, iconophile. So they've got this tension going on inside the church. Have we been living right, or are we sinning? And every time their armies would lose in the field, it kind of looked like we're sinning. And what are we going to do now? Well, now here come the Muslim Arabs and their allies and a big new fleet. It looks scary. But along comes a very vigorous emperor. If I'm remembering correctly, his name is Leo, but there are many Leos, so it's kind of like Louis in French history. So I think it's Leo the Isaurian, if I'm remembering correctly. But this emperor says, oh, we're going to fight until the end. So he gets the Patriarch of Constantinople to lead processions, just like they have done many times before. And he deploys a weapon that they've kind of perfected. And this is a shipborne weapon often, although it is on the walls some. It's basically a mixture of crude oil and a variety of other ingredients that burns very, very easily. And then in their ships, what they do, they mount this kind of bronze nozzle on the end of their ship, and they have a big bladder underneath in the ship's hold full of this really flammable, heavy liquid. And they figured out a way to squeeze that and squirt the liquid out that nozzle and light it at the same time. This is called Greek fire. And when the Arab fleet sails up through this Bosphorus, as they get to just the right place, the Byzantine fleet comes out of its protected anchorage and proceeds to rake them with this fire. And the Arab fleet is thoroughly defeated by the Byzantine fleet, partly because of the Greek fire, but partly because of other factors. But because the empire is able to destroy because the Byzantine Empire is able to destroy the Muslim fleet, that big Muslim army on land is kind of stranded. How are they going to get across the Bosporus? And that really pulls the rug out of underneath this campaign. And so the Umayyad caliphs decide that, well, maybe we can't defeat Constantinople after all, and they go back and defeat. Now, you'll remember that there's a bunch of area that they conquer over here. So let's talk about that, because if you are a Christian in Europe, you hear about the attack on Constantinople and you go, ooh, we dodged a bullet. And about that time, you'll hear about the attacks over here. So what's going on over here is the Visigoths are the Germanic tribe that conquer Spain. Pretty quickly on, the Christian Northern African coastline gets conquered by these Muslim warriors out of Egypt. And these Bedouin tribes out here in the desert quickly convert to Islam. And that gives them an awful lot of manpower to pull from, who also fight and kind of think like these desert tribes over here in Arabia do. So there's really quite a lot of connection there. And they attack this Visigothic kingdom of Spain. And it doesn't take them long at all. I mean, it happens very quickly. It's just kind of one year after another, they're taking another chunk of the Visigothic kingdom. And before you know it, they've taken all of the Iberian Peninsula, except for this little bit up here, a few Christian kingdoms hanging on up here. We'll come to them later. But remember, right up here in this part of the world are some very tall mountains called the Pyrenees. And those Pyrenees offer some protection for groups that are kind of hiding among, or gives them protected places to defend, let's say. But this raid is launched from Muslim-controlled Muslim-controlled Iberian Peninsula. This raid is launched up to see what's going on up here north of the Pyrenees. And another Germanic tribe is up there who set up a kingdom. They've become Christians for quite some time. They're called the Franks. We call them the French now. They're called the Franks. And at this period in history, one of the more vigorous Frankish kings is in charge, and his name is Charles. And this great Muslim raid comes north. Probably they had more or less reached the end of their ability to, their supply line was really stretched. So they kind of gone as far north as they could, but they're still, raiding places and taking money from cathedrals and things like that. So Charles leads a large army of Franks out there and some allies. There's a huge battle. It's called the Battle of Tours. And at the Battle of Tours, the Franks, under Charles Martel, as he will be called, I'll tell you why in a little bit, defeat the Muslims thoroughly. So the Muslims get a serious defeat here in Tours in 732, and they pretty much go back and stay in the area they controlled already. Now, during that battle, Charles Martel is said to have wielded a great battle axe with extraordinary ferocity, and hence his nickname is Charles the Hammer. Martel is hammer in French. So Charles the Hammer is venerated as a great Christian hero because he hammered against the Muslims. Is there some cognitive dissent in your head? Like this should be creating some tension inside of you. I keep saying Christian and warrior, and you see how much what the cycle has been so far. So Christians allied, starting with Constantine over here, Christians allied with the state. They begin to use coercion and violence against their enemies. And then in this talk, we've learned about a new enemy that is truly not Christian, and it does not want Christians to succeed. So it's an enemy. And suddenly, Christians are once again using coercion and violence to defend themselves. And they're not very successful in this one, except all the way up here in France and over here in Constantinople. Those are the two places they're successful. Other than that, they've lost a whole bunch of Christian territory. And it's caused deep uncertainty in the Christians. Like, are we living correctly? What's going on? We thought we were on the right side. So my argument is they're not on the right side anymore because of the deep dysfunction that Constantine has talked them into accepting in their midst. They've become allied. They've left the teachings of Jesus, and they've become allied with the state in a way that has taken away their power. It's bled off the vigorous power of the early persecuted church who knew what it was like to love their enemies and to pray for those who did wrong to them. And they've left that behind, and now they're trying to get God to defeat their enemies militarily. And it's not really working particularly well. So they tell stories, hero stories around Charles Martel or around Leo the Isaurian defending Constantinople. But it's kind of a different sort of hero from what the early church tells. Remember the stories of the martyrs in the early church? Those are really different. Something has changed. So this is the kind of the first cycle that we can see how Christians impose violence and coercion on others, and others impose violence and coercion on them. There's back and forth. So this is the roots, you might say, the deepest roots of the Christian-Muslim difficulties, troubles. Now, whenever we talk about historical roots, it's really easy to go back in history and find something that happened here and then say, well, this is the cause of the problem. There's a way of thinking about that kind of helps you avoid that error. And that is to say, the closer you get to the events that you're trying to describe, the more important the historical stories become. So farther back, they just kind of show you a hint at where it's going. Closer to it, they start to describe what's really going on in more detail. So what we're looking at here is just the hint. We're just seeing the hint of the cycles to come. But tomorrow morning, we're going to look at more of those cycles. And on Sunday, we'll get closer home to, we'll get into the 20th century. So by the middle 700s, under the Umayyad Caliphate, Islam had emerged as the most vigorous monotheistic religion. Its culture and language would transform great swaths of Africa, Asia, and Europe. Its expansive tendencies would soon turn inward, and a less hostile and more trade-based society would replace the relentless conquests of the first century. However, new peoples and new manifestations of old threats would eventually confront the caliphs of the Islamic Golden Age. And we'll talk about that tomorrow when we talk about the Crusades. That is all I have for today. Thank you for being a interested and polite audience. Feel free to ask more questions tomorrow. Why don't we close with prayer? Lord, we thank you for the power that you have given to your church. help us learn this weekend how we can surrender some of the opportunities that might be offered to us because they aren't as powerful as the ones you're offering. So we do want to learn from history. We want to learn from you. And we know that if we look at what has happened before us, often that can give us guidance for how to live going forward. But we don't want to just expect history to explain it all. We know that we've got to compare it to what you have said in your word, and we want to do that as well. Amen.